We are back to see the results of the soil texture test that we took a little while ago. So we have the 3 different jars here from the 3 different soil samples that we took. And, you know, the jars sat for a couple of weeks. I just didn't get around to coming back to them. So the different layers are nice and settled now. And the first thing that I did was, taking a look at the layers, I marked out where each of the layers kind of separate. It is a little bit subjective because you can see there's kind of just a gradient that happens between the different particle sizes. And, but I had to draw a line of kind of where the sand ends and where the silt begins. And then on top of that, where the silt ends and where the clay begins. So you can see the clay is actually a real light color. And just below that is where I marked the different layer there. So the next thing is to take a ruler, and we're going to measure exactly how much of each of the layers there are. And in this first sample, we have a total of about 60 millimeters. And when I look at the different layers, the sand is 36 millimeters. The silt is 16 millimeters. And the clay is about 8 millimeters. Moving over to the second sample. We've got a total of 51 millimeters. And to look at the different layers, we've got 33 millimeters of sand, about 12 millimeters of silt, and about 6 millimeters of clay. And then moving on to the third one, we've got a total of right about 55 millimeters. And the sand comes to 37 millimeters. The silt we have about 11 millimeters. And the clay is about 7 millimeters. So I've written down each of those measurements. Now let's work out the percentages. Okay, now that we have recorded the measurements of each of the different layers for each sample here, let's talk about what's the ideal amount of each of these different layers. So ideally, we want about 30 to 50% sand, 30 to 50% silt, and then a little bit less clay, like maybe 20 to 30% clay. Okay, so I have the measurements that we've taken here recorded, and let's just go over each of the samples one by one. So in our first sample here, out of the 60 millimeters total, 36 millimeters were sand, and that comes to about 60%. So it's a little heavy on the sand, so 60%. And then for silt, we had 16 millimeters. That comes to 26.6%. So a little bit low on the silt, and then only 8 millimeters of clay, which brings it to about 13.4%. So pretty low on the clay and heavy on the sand. Okay, so for the second one, we're going to see pretty similar results across the board. Out of the 51 millimeters total here, we had 33 millimeters were sand. And so that's 64.7% sand, so quite a bit of sand. 12 millimeters of silt, and that comes to 23.5% silt. And then only 6 millimeters of clay, which comes to 11.8%. So again, pretty heavy on the sand and light on the silt and the clay. And then finally for our third sample here, which is funny because I've amended this a couple different years, and I would have thought it would have come out quite a bit different, but it actually is pretty similar. Let's see, so out of 55 millimeters total, 37 millimeters were sand, so that's 67.3% sand, so more sand in this one than the other two. 11 millimeters were silt, so that's 20%. And then finally, 7 millimeters of clay is at about 12.7%. So really they're all pretty similar. It looks like I have pretty heavy sand and pretty light clay. So what kind of information does this give us now? So we know that we're pretty heavy in the sand, and what heavy sand soil is going to do for us is it's going to have more drainage. So this can be a good thing, but it does mean that it may take more water, right? The water is going to drain away a little faster. So we're going to need to have something that really holds that water. And the best thing to do is to amend your soil with lots of rich organic matter. So we're going to be putting a lot of compost in this soil, and the compost is going to help retain the moisture so that we don't have to water so much, so that it doesn't just drain away and leach out and drain away. Okay, so that's really what I got out of this this soil texture test here, is that we're going to need to amend with a lot of compost and maybe do a little bit more watering to make up for the heavy sand soil. Now, if you're kind of following along and maybe doing your own test and you find that you have a really heavy and clay soil, then what's going to happen is it's not going to drain as much. You're going to have a little bit more time getting air in there as well. So the ground is going to saturate a lot easier and take longer to kind of dry out, which is good for water retention, but you are going to want that water to drain away to be able to have enough air in the soil as well. So again, the solution for that is more organic material. So the organic material is going to be able to soak up the excess water and bring some structure and some fluffiness to your soil to bring in that air. So even though the solution to any kind of imbalance that you may have in your soil is the same, really. It's just to add more organic material, add compost to your soil, and you're going to get more nutrients, you're going to get more life, right? The microorganisms and even the worms and some of the larger life that is living in the soil is all beneficial for the soil. But it's good to know kind of what your starting place is here. And I'm glad to know that I have kind of a heavy sand soil. So I'm going to be working in that organic material and fix this soil up. Okay, so that's about it for the soil texture test. Let me know if you have any questions. All right.